Hello, my name is Luann Heatbrink. I am on staff here at Third Church in pastoral care. But prior to that, I was a hospice nurse for 20 years, and that is part of the background that I have for coming to teach you about how we view God, especially when we're going through times of suffering. How you see God affects everything about you. It is the lens through which we look at the world and ourselves. Our image of God is so important. It affects the very core of who we think God is and who we think we are. Tozer puts it this way: what comes into our minds when we think of God is the most important thing about us. So if we see God as a policeman, we live in fear of punishment. If we see God as a judge, we feel like we could never be worthy. If we see God as a harsh parent, we will dread his discipline. And if we see God as a demanding teacher, we will live in fear of failure. If we see God as a genie in the bottle, we get disillusioned when things just don't work out as we wished. But if we see God as our protector, we will run to him and feel safe. And if we see God as our shepherd, we are comforted by his presence. If we see God as our beloved, we will love him in return. And if we see God as our Savior, wow, we are humbled and amazed that he would actually die for us. So the image of God, it just affects our whole life. And we're going to take a look at this by using 5 different theories within the Bible to talk about suffering. All 5 are biblical, and that's what gets so confusing. So in your handouts for this session, you will see the 5 different theories and their biblical references, so you can refer to those. They are these: that bad things happen because God is punishing us, that bad things happen because they want to make other people better, God does this because he wants us to be better, or the last 2 are evil causes bad things, or nature. So we are going to start out with the first one, which is this person in the diagram is a person who's had something bad happen, and he or she totally feels that she deserves this, that this is God's punishment toward them. So you can see the arrows that the bad things are actually coming from the circle with the G in it, which is God. Since I have no idea what God looks like for today, that's God. So God is sending the bad things to this person. The other 2 lines that you see they speak to the relationship that this person has with God. And these people really fear God and see him as a tyrant or a judge. And so they want to be angry with God for doing this to them. But what happens in this, you can see the additional line that goes back toward the stick person. What happens, they are afraid to be angry at God because, of course, what happens if you get angry at God? He's going to just send more bad things to you. So they tend to become angry at themselves. So these people typically will be depressed, self-loathing, feel a lot of guilt and shame. But in their reasoning, they say, okay, if I did something bad to create this, then voila, how do I get rid of it? I start being good. So in that rational sense, they think they have control over this bad thing. The second theory is that bad things happen to us so that others can watch how we do this as a Christian and then be drawn to Christ because of our witness. So again, in your diagram, you see the larger stick person. That's the person that something bad has happened to. Again, you have God with the circle around it, sending the bad thing to that person. And the idea is that these other smaller stick figures will see the person handling this illness or this tragedy in very godly ways and say, oh, that person's different. I think I should check out who this God is. Now, the relationship part of this person who has the bad thing and God, you can see that there's a question mark there and a couple of barrier lines. These people can feel two different ways. First of all, they can feel very chosen, feel like God is using them in the greater good. And that is why you see a big red cross in this diagram too. These people can feel very connected with the suffering of Christ because, of course, he suffered on the cross for the greater good too. But there are some people that are like, God, this is not fair. I am the righteous person. If you want to draw these other people to you, send the bad thing directly to them. Leave me out of this. And so that relationship with God can look a couple of different ways in these particular theory. Our third theory says that God is sending something to make us better people. Again, as you look at the diagram, here's the stick figure. The relationship with God is, again, has that question mark, but again, God is sending these things to this person to make them a better Christian. So that's why the Bible is in this person's hand. The Bible is full of passages about God disciplining those he loves and that kind of thing, and the relationship, if people see it in that regard, they're like, okay, God, I will turn this bad thing into good and become even closer to you than I have been in the past, because I know that I'm not everything that you want me to be. The other side that these people can feel is like, God, really, does it take you to send this bad thing for me to come back to you? Couldn't you have come up with a better solution than sending me this bad thing? So this person can feel a couple of different ways, but they feel like God is a very parental in this, where he's doing this out of discipline and for their good. The fourth theory talks about God allowing things to happen in the world because of evil in the world. And you will notice a distinct difference in these last two, because you'll notice that the bad thing is not coming directly from God. So since I wanted to depict evil, so the E with the circle around it in the diagram is evil, and that is what's sending the bad thing to the person. The thing about this theory is the question mark between God and evil. And this person has to figure out for themselves, does God have control over evil? And if I pray, will God remove what evil is trying to do in my life? And if not, then why should I pray? Or there may be a question, is God allowing things to happen? That the cause of the bad thing is evil, but God, how do you play into this? So God can be on their side. You see no barrier in their relationship to God, because the person who is going through the hard thing is in partnership with God against evil. The fifth theory has nature as the bad guy. And we all know that there are laws of nature that live in our world. So again, you have your stick figure with bad things happening, such as floods or hurricanes or tornadoes or things like that are a natural order in this world. So God is, again, not the cause. So this person can still feel very connected with God. There doesn't seem to be a barrier there. But again, that question, can God intervene and change the order of nature to protect me? So if I'm in my basement praying, God, have that tornado skip over my house, that's that question. Does God sometimes overrule the laws of nature to protect us? So lots of questions in that as well. Now, I think it's very important if you plan to pray with others that you personally come to your own understanding of how those 5 theories connect with you spiritually. I have a great tool that I came across in my hospice days that helps you discern that. And it will be connected with this video. This tool has 9 statements on it, and they're all statements about why bad things happen. And the beauty of it, you can rate from 1 to 5 how much you agree with that statement or how much you disagree with the statement. And then it gives you the opportunity to actually change the statement so that it truly reflects what you believe. So it's a great process. I'd highly, highly recommend that you use that tool to really sort out for yourself which of these theories you believe. Now, anytime that we start talking about bad things happening to good people, the idea of God's will automatically starts to come up. And it did with me in my hospice experience, too. When I first started with hospice, I saw really good people going through some really bad things. And so someone recommended this great little book. You could read it in an afternoon. It's God's Will by Leslie Weatherhead. And instead of lumping God's will into one big thing, Weatherhead splits it into 3 parts, which made so much sense to me. He talks about God's intentional will, which is how God created the world, which was perfect and had no pain and no suffering. And that was the way he intended things to be. But he also gave us free will. And because of our free will, we now have evil in the world. And he labels what we are living in right now as God's circumstantial will. It's not like God intended, but he is with us and he is in our circumstances right now. But the beauty of this is that there's a 3rd part, which is God's ultimate will. And that is, of course, when the Lord comes back and we are in heaven with him, where there's no more pain and no more suffering and no more tears. And that's great news. And I just think that's so cool that his ultimate will and his intentional will look just the same. So I have heard the phrase, "it was God's will," used so many times, especially when I worked for hospice. And I feel pretty strongly about that phrase. I think it's one of the most misused expressions that I came across. And I think most people who use these words intend them to bring comfort. But often the use of the phrase, "it was God's will," brings confusion and can sometimes end up blaming God for the bad thing that has happened. And that reasoning can often leave people with a resigned and fatalistic response to the bad thing, and can lead them to feeling alone and like God is against them. I love a quote by Bill Johnson, and he says, "God's will is for heaven's reality to become earth's reality." We say that every time we say the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I think that's God's intent, is that always heaven's reality becomes earth's reality. So all of that being said, I may have raised more questions than I've answered, but that was actually my intent. This is very important for you to wrestle with this idea of why bad things happen to good people. I want to end our time together with a quote from Henry Nouwen that just really captures some of this not knowing. What he says is, when we honestly ask ourselves which persons in our lives mean the most to us, we often find that it is those who, instead of giving much advice, solutions, or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a gentle, tender hand. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face with us the reality of our powerlessness. That is the friend who cares.